Morning of my engagement party, I was standing in my future mother-in-law's kitchen in a pair of dark jeans and a cream blouse, arranging a tray of champagne flutes, when she walked in, looked me up and down, and said, "You missed a spot on the counter. And those glasses aren't centered. Try to be more careful. We have important guests arriving in 2 hours." I smiled and said, "Of course, I'll fix it right away." She had no idea she was talking to her son's fiancé. I should probably back up. My name is Autumn. I'm 29 years old, and 6 months ago, the man I love, a structural engineer named West, asked me to marry him on a hiking trail in Shenandoah, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and mud on both our boots. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We laughed about that for weeks. West and I met at a mutual friend's rooftop birthday party in DC 3 years ago. He was the one standing slightly apart from the crowd, holding a beer he wasn't drinking, looking out at the city like he was calculating load-bearing capacity of the skyline. I walked over and said, "You look like you're either an architect or having a really specific existential crisis." He turned and smiled and said, "Both, kind of." We talked until everyone else left. I knew by the end of that night. He's kind in the way that counts. The quiet, consistent kind. He shows up. He remembers things. He once drove 40 minutes in rush hour traffic just to bring me soup when I had a cold, then left after 20 minutes because he didn't want to wear me out. That's him. His mother is a different story. Her name is Claudette. She and her husband Roland built a family business, commercial real estate, mostly in Northern Virginia, and they did well. Not generational wealth well, but new money uncomfortable about it well, which in my experience is actually the harder kind to deal with. Claudette had retrofitted herself into the version of a woman she thought that money required her to be. Designer clothes with the logo always visible. A house in McLean with a circular driveway and a catering staff she called by last name only. Opinions delivered as facts. From the moment West told her about me, she was cold. I'm a landscape architect. I grew up in a middle-class family in Roanoke, Virginia. My father drove a school bus for 22 years. My mother taught piano lessons out of our living room. I have a master's degree and my own small firm, and none of that registered for Claudette as anything other than not enough. She'd never met me in person. West and I had been doing long distance for the first year, and then when things got serious, every attempt to arrange a meeting got derailed. She was traveling. We were traveling. Schedules didn't align. I thought it was bad luck. West eventually told me quietly that he wasn't entirely sure it was bad luck on her end. She'd seen my Instagram. She had questions, the kind of questions that weren't really questions. When West told his parents we were engaged, his mother's first response, according to him, was, "Well, I hope you thought this through." Not congratulations, not excitement. "I hope you thought this through," delivered in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. The engagement party was her idea, actually. She insisted on hosting it herself at the McLean house, and I, trying very hard to be generous, trying very hard to assume the best, thought maybe this was her reaching out, her way of opening a door. West thought so too, or at least he wanted to, so we said yes. The plan was for me to arrive early with my best friend Tatum to help set up. West was coming later with his dad, who'd been held up with some business thing. My future mother-in-law knew West's fiancé was named Autumn, that I was a landscape architect, that I was from Roanoke. She'd seen one photo, West said, his profile picture from 2 years ago, where I was standing half in shadow at someone's wedding, wearing dark red and with my hair up. Not exactly a clear identification. When Tatum and I pulled into the driveway that morning, Claudette was outside directing a catering company like a general who'd already lost patience with her troops. She had a clipboard. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had the look of a woman who had spent 30 years being the most important person in every room she entered and wasn't about to stop now. She glanced at us as we walked up. "You're from the catering company?" she said. Tatum opened her mouth. I put a hand on her arm. "We're here to help set up," I said pleasantly. That was technically true. Claudette looked at my outfit, jeans, blouse, comfortable flats, because I knew I'd be on my feet all morning. and made a small sound in the back of her throat that managed to convey an entire paragraph of judgment in under a second. "Fine," she said. "The kitchen needs finishing. Flowers need to go on the back terrace tables. And someone needs to recount the chairs. The company swears there are 60, but I only see 54, and I won't be lied to." "Absolutely," I said. I kept my voice neutral and warm and completely deliberately unrevealing. Tatum grabbed my sleeve as we walked inside and hissed, "Autumn, what are you doing?" "Learning something," I said. I want to be honest about my reasoning, because I know how this sounds. I wasn't plotting anything dramatic. I wasn't setting a trap. I was genuinely, in real time, making a choice to observe. I had spent 2 years hearing about Claudette secondhand, through West's careful, diplomatic edits of conversations, through the occasional comment that slipped through the way he'd get quiet sometimes when his phone buzzed, and I could tell it was her. I had been given a version of her that was already filtered through someone who loved her. Now I was here, in her space, and she didn't know who I was. I wanted to see who she actually was. And within 40 minutes, I had a pretty complete picture. She directed me to re-iron a tablecloth that was already ironed because she thought she saw a crease. She sent me back to the kitchen 3 times for things that turned out to already be on the table. She told me that the floral arrangements I'd personally overseen, because I was a landscape architect and had opinions about flowers, were a little rustic for the aesthetic we're going for. She said this to my face, about flowers I had chosen, about an aesthetic I was literally part of. At one point she asked me where I was from, the way people sometimes ask it when they mean something else by it. "Virginia," I said. "Which part?" "Roanoke." She made the sound again. And then turned to adjust a centerpiece. I counted chairs. There was 60. I didn't say anything. Around 11:30, with guests arriving at noon, she cornered me near the wet bar and said, "Has anyone told you what the situation is with the family today? My son is getting engaged. Well, has gotten engaged, apparently, to someone I've never actually met. I want to make sure the event goes smoothly before," she paused, chose a word, "before all that gets underway." "I understand completely," I said. "It's important to you." "She's a landscape architect," Claudette said. And the way she said it, the slight flattening of the word, told me everything I needed to know about how she planned to introduce me to her friends. I just hope she understands what she's walking into. This family has standards, history. It's not a simple thing. I nodded and picked up a tray of canapés. I'm sure she's aware. Tatum, who had been within earshot, later told me she'd had to go stand in the pantry and count to 20. West arrived at 11:50 with his dad Roland, who was genuinely one of the warmer people I've met. He'd always been kind to me over the phone, and the moment he saw me, he crossed the room and gave me a hug that felt real. "Finally," he said, and he meant it. West kissed my cheek and then looked at the room, at the tablecloths and the flowers and the 60 perfectly placed chairs, and raised an eyebrow at me. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been learning a lot," I said. His mother came around the corner at that exact moment, clipboard in hand, and stopped when she saw me standing next to West. She looked at me. She looked at him. She looked at him. She looked back at me. Something shifted in her face. "West," she said carefully. "Who is?" "Mom," he said, and his voice was easy, relaxed. The voice of a man who had no idea what the last 2 hours had looked like. "This is Autumn, my fiancé." The clipboard lowered by about 3 inches. I watched her do the math. The jeans, the blouse, the flowers she'd called rustic, the tablecloth she'd made me re-iron, the chairs I'd counted, the conversation about the landscape architect at the wet bar, the canapés I'd been carrying. Her face went through several things in rapid succession. I recognized all of them. "We've met," I said warmly. "You were so helpful orienting me this morning. I really appreciated it." The room had maybe 8 people in it at that moment. Early arrivals, Roland, West, Tatum. Tatum was looking at the ceiling with the particular expression of someone trying not to laugh and failing. Claudette said, I wasn't aware." "That I was the fiancé," I said, still warm, still pleasant, not letting her have any angle. "That's okay. It gave me a chance to see how much you care about getting things right. The party looks beautiful. West looked between us. He wasn't quite following, but he was following enough. He put his arm around me in the uncomplicated way he does when he wants to make something clear without making it loud. She's been here since 9, Tatum offered from across the room, unable to help herself. Very helpful with the chairs. Roland laughed. He seemed to understand immediately, and I liked him even more for it. Claudette composed herself with the efficiency of a woman who'd spent decades composing herself in front of other people. She said, "I'm glad everything came together," and then excused herself to check on the kitchen, and I watched her go, and I felt, not triumphant exactly, more like something had been answered. I had my information. I knew what I was dealing with. The party itself was, on the surface, fine. 60 people. Nice weather for October. Roland gave a toast that was genuinely sweet and mentioned me by name 3 times and made West's eyes go red at the edges. Tatum gave a toast that made everyone laugh and made me cry a little. West's grandmother, a small, fierce woman named Emmeline, who used to walk and appeared to have no filter whatsoever, found me in the garden and said, "I heard you counted 60 chairs after Claudette told you there were 54. You're going to be fine here." Claudette's toast was technically complimentary and emotionally arctic. She said she was looking forward to getting to know the woman West had chosen, and that she hoped we would have many opportunities to grow closer as a family. She said this looking approximately 4 inches above my head, in the tone of a diplomat negotiating a treaty she hadn't wanted to sign. West squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back. After the guests left, when it was just the family and Tatum helping fold napkins, Claudette asked to speak with me privately on the back terrace. I said yes. She stood with her back to the view, which was considerable. Rolling lawn and mature trees and the kind of landscape I'd have given real professional thought to. And she said, "I want to acknowledge that this morning was not how I intended things to go." "Okay," I said. "I didn't know who you were." "I know." "That's not an excuse," she said. "And I'll give her this." She said it without flinching. "I know that." I waited. She said, "I have a certain way I do things. I have expectations. That's not going to change overnight. But I want you to know that I'm—" She stopped, selected the word carefully, willing to try. I thought about the tablecloth, the rustic flowers, the "I hope you thought this through," the 2 years of cancelled meetings that might not have been entirely accidental. I thought about West and the way he'd said my name when he introduced me, like it was something he was proud of. I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I'm willing to." I meant it, not naively. I wasn't walking away from that conversation thinking everything was resolved or that Claudette had transformed into someone different. I was walking away knowing exactly who she was, knowing she knew I knew, and knowing that whatever happened next, I was starting from a position of clarity instead of illusion. West was waiting for me inside. He had 2 mugs of coffee, which in 3 years I'd learned was his version of emotional support in a form he could physically hand to someone. "How'd it go?" he said. "We're fine," I said. "We'll figure it out." He handed me the coffee. "She made you carry canapés." "She did." "Autumn. Autumn." "I know." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "I meant that too. I needed to see it, now I have." He looked at me for a long moment with that particular West expression, the one that's mostly quiet and a little bit amazed and slightly like he's recalculating something. And then he said, "You are genuinely the most." "Don't," I said. "Formidable person I've ever met," he finished. I laughed into my coffee. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Claudette and I have had coffee twice. Once at a place she'd chosen to claim, once at a place I chose in the city. And I think the geography mattered to both of us, even if neither of us said so. We are not close. We are not pretending to be. But she asks me real questions now, and she listens to the answers. And once, she told Roland in front of me that I had a good eye for a project he'd been describing, and the way she said it had no edge in it at all. West asked me recently if I thought we'd ever actually get there, fully get there, the whole complicated in-law relationship working the way it's supposed to. I said I thought we might, Not because Claudette had changed into someone else, but because she'd made a choice in that moment on the terrace that I believed was real. She could have gotten defensive. She could have framed the whole morning as a misunderstanding and moved on without acknowledging any of it. She didn't. She stood there and said, "This is not an excuse. That's not nothing. I'm not a person who needs my mother-in-law to love me. I've never needed that. What I needed was to walk into this marriage knowing the truth, not the managed version, not the diplomatic edit, but the actual shape of the thing I was agreeing to build my life around." The morning of that engagement party, standing in her kitchen with a tray of champagne flutes, I got exactly that. And honestly, I wouldn't change it. I think about that moment a lot, standing in Claudette's kitchen, holding a tray I hadn't been asked to hold, being told to re-iron a tablecloth that was already perfect. I could have said something. I could have introduced myself the second she mistook me for catering staff. Nobody would have blamed me. But I didn't, and I've thought about why, and I think the honest answer is this. I wanted to know who I was actually dealing with. Not the version that gets performed for a future daughter-in-law, the real one. That choice, to stay quiet, to watch, to learn, wasn't passive. It took something. It took me swallowing a dozen instincts to defend myself and replacing them with something steadier, patience and clarity. And what I got in return was information nobody could have given me secondhand. I saw exactly how Claudette moved through a room when she thought no one important was watching. I heard how she talked about me, a woman she'd never met, in terms that said more about her fears than her values. I counted 60 chairs she was convinced were 54, and I said nothing because I wasn't there to win a small argument. I was there to understand the larger one. There's a version of that morning where I announce myself immediately, where there's a scene, where Claudette is embarrassed in front of the catering staff, and we start our relationship with an open wound. I'm glad that's not the version that happened, not because conflict should always be avoided, it shouldn't, but because the way you handle a moment like that says something about who you are and what you're building. I didn't want to build my marriage on a foundation of "I got you." I wanted to build it on something I could actually stand on. Wes's grandmother, Emmeline, told me I was going to be fine. She said it like she'd seen enough of life to know the difference between people who fold under pressure and people who get quieter and more precise. I don't know if she was right about me specifically, but I know that what got me through that morning wasn't anger, even though anger would have been completely justified. It was something more like resolve, a decision I'd made before I walked through that door that I was going to see this clearly, whatever clearly turned out to look like. And Claudette. I want to be fair to her here because fairness matters to me even when it's complicated. She did something hard on that terrace. She stood in front of me and said the words, "That's not an excuse," about her own behavior, without being prompted, without waiting to see if I'd let her off the hook first. That took something too. It took a kind of honesty that I don't think comes easily to people who spent decades being the most important person in every room. I noticed it. I'm still not sure what we'll be to each other 5 years from now, but I noticed it. What I keep coming back to is this. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. You can manage it, delay it, filter it through diplomacy and careful editing, but it finds its way out. The morning of that engagement party, I just gave it a little help. I walked into a situation without armor, without announcement, and I let it show me exactly what it was. That's not a trick I'd recommend as a general strategy for life. But in that specific moment, for that specific question I needed answered, it was exactly right. I'm not naive enough to think one honest conversation on a terrace fixed everything. Relationships like the one I'm building with Claudette take years, and some of those years will probably be hard. But I'm walking into them knowing what I know. And that, more than any perfect engagement party, more than any toast or centerpiece or counted chair, is what I actually needed.